It's day 61 of the Israel-Hamas war, and heavy fighting is taking place across Gaza, with house-to-house fighting reported as Israeli forces intensify their ground operation. Tanks are closing in on three areas: Khan Yunis in the south and Jabalia and Shujaya in the north, where hundreds of thousands of civilians still remain. The United Nations says 600,000 people are under evacuation orders in southern Gaza, but there is nowhere to go because shelters are so full. A Palestinian journalist in Khan Yunis has been quoted as saying airstrikes are taking place every few minutes and everything is shaking. On Tuesday, Israel said its troops had reached the heart of Khan Yunis, the largest southern city, on the most intense day of fighting in its ground operation. Israel believes Hamas leaders could be hiding in the city, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists the war can only be won with crushing force. The Hamas attack in Israel, which sparked this war, killed 1,200 people, with around 240 others taken hostage. Hamas officials in Gaza say at least 16,200 people have been killed in Israel's retaliatory campaign, including about 7,000 children. Meanwhile, spine-chilling details of the unspeakable sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas terrorists against Israeli women on the 7th of October are now emerging. Israel says there is indisputable evidence of gruesome rapes, barbaric sexual assaults, and even mutilation of scores of women who were brutalized on the bloodiest day in Israel's history. The details that have emerged are so macabre, graphic and disturbing that it's difficult for us to share all those details with our viewers. Many international media houses have reported that eyewitnesses and those involved in collecting and identifying the bodies of the victims who were killed have seen innumerable signs of sexual assault, including broken pelvises, bruises, cuts and tears. The victims ranged from children and teenagers to pensioners. Videos of naked and bloodied women filmed by Hamas on the day of the attack and photographs of bodies taken at the sites afterwards clearly suggest that women were sexually targeted by their attackers, and few victims survived to tell their own stories. In one case, the Hamas terrorists gang-raped a woman and mercilessly mutilated her before the last of her attackers shot her in the head, even as he continued to rape her. Many of these women who were brutally assaulted had their body parts chopped off. In other instances, women were raped and then decapitated. The nature of the assault in most of these cases can only be described as beastly and inhuman. Some women were raped before they were dead, some were raped while injured, and some were already dead when the terrorists raped their lifeless bodies. Those who did manage to survive these attacks are currently receiving psychiatric treatment. They're unable to even talk. But a majority were brutally murdered. It is evident that Hamas weaponized the bodies of these women. Hundreds of bodies were collected from the attack sites, scores of them butchered. A doctor who treated some of the 110 released hostages has said that at least 10 women and men amongst those freed were sexually assaulted or abused. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has lashed out at the United Nations and other agencies over their silence on this matter. He said, and I quote, "I say to the women's rights organizations, to the human rights organizations, you've heard of the rape of Israeli women, horrible atrocities, sexual mutilation. Where the hell are you?" US President Joe Biden has said, over the past few weeks, survivors and witnesses of the attacks have shared the horrific accounts of unimaginable cruelty. Reports of women raped, repeatedly raped, and their bodies being mutilated while still alive, of women corpses being desecrated, Hamas terrorists inflicting as much pain and suffering on women and girls as possible and then murdering them. It is appalling. The world can't just look away at what's going on. It's on all of us to forcibly condemn the sexual violence of Hamas terrorists without equivocation, he said.
Today, along with the cabinet ministers, I met with the families of the hostages, those who have returned home and those who we are trying to bring back home. I heard stories that broke my heart. I heard about the thirst and hunger, about physical and mental abuse, about the little witnesses that are still whispering from fear, about the darkness the loved ones still live under. I heard, and you also heard, about sexual assault and cases of brutal rape, unlike anything. But I must say that just until a few days, I didn't hear human rights organizations and women's rights organizations. I didn't hear women's organizations in the UN. I didn't hear their outrage. Our fighters are expanding the ground operation against Hamas in every place in the Strip, including the south of the Strip. Tonight, we operated there with massive force. The earth shook in Khan Yunis. The earth shook in Jabalia. We besieged both of them. There is no place beyond our reach. We took control of the General Security Command of the Hamas. Our brave soldiers are fighting powerfully against the killers. They are conducting close-quarter battles. They are eliminating terrorists around the clock, and we are the upper hand in every battle.
As the IDF expands its operations to dismantle Hamas in Gaza, we have not lost sight, not for one moment, of our critical mission to rescue our hostages, to do everything in our power to bring our hostages home. Our intelligence has been monitoring the situation of our hostages, and I can say with absolute certainty, every minute in Hamas captivity endangers their lives. This is an urgent call for action. The international community must take action. The Red Cross must have access to the hostages that are in the hands of Hamas. 138 hostages, children, women, men, the elderly, have been in Hamas captivity for over 60 days, in brutal and inhumane conditions. Some of the hostages in Hamas captivity have chronic illness and life-threatening conditions. Some of the men and women in Hamas captivity were injured during the massacre of October 7th. Some have been harmed since. Every day, every hour, every minute is critical. The lives of our hostages are at risk.
The catastrophic situation we see unfolding in the Gaza Strip was entirely foreseeable and preventable. My humanitarian colleagues have described the situation as apocalyptic. In these circumstances, there is a heightened risk of atrocity crimes. Measures need to be taken urgently, both by the parties concerned and by all states, particularly those with influence, to prevent any such crimes. The international community needs to insist with one voice on a ceasefire immediately on human rights and humanitarian grounds. Palestinians in Gaza are living in utter, deepening horror. Military operations, including bombardments by Israeli forces, continue in North, Middle, and South Gaza, affecting people who have already been displaced multiple times, forced to flee in search of safety. But no place is safe. As we speak, some 1.9 million out of the 2.2 million Palestinians have been displaced and are being pushed into ever-diminishing and extremely overcrowded places in southern Gaza in unsanitary and unhealthy conditions. And humanitarian aid is again virtually cut off as fears of widespread disease and hunger spread.
All right, let's introduce our guests. Joining me on the show tonight is Anat Bernstein-Reich. She's the president of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce and CEO of Israel-India Investment Banking at BDO in Israel. Thank you so much, Anat, for joining us once again. Irina Sukerman, national security and geopolitical analyst, joins us live from New York. And Ambassador Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat, is also with us. She joins us from New Delhi. A warm welcome to all my guests. Anat, if I could start with you. Yes, we've for days and weeks now talked about the ongoing war in Gaza and how it's now spreading from the north to the south. We'll come to that in a moment. But first, I want to focus on the horrors of what the Israeli women had to go through or were subjected to on the 7th of October during the bloodiest day in Israel's history. We've known for 2 months now that 1,200 Israelis were butchered and 240 people, again most of them Israelis, were taken hostage. However, the details of the sexual violence and assaults that are emerging now, I think are absolutely spine-chilling and horrific. I'm not suggesting that we were not aware of this earlier, but as more and more eyewitness accounts come forward, it is becoming clear that the Hamas terrorists brutalized those women in the most unspeakable fashion, turning their bodies into battlegrounds, as it were. Do you believe that the world has, in a sense, ignored these horrific and unspeakable sexual crimes that took place that day?
Good evening, Neha, and thanks for having me again in your show, a very important topic that you're bringing today. And yes, as you rightly said, the world ignored the atrocities. It's beyond atrocities. It's I don't even have words to say what those terrorists or monsters did to the women on October 7th. The testimonials were there from the first beginning, but it took time really to collect all the information, and it's a massive attack and so many stories, and we are creating the pieces of the puzzle, and now we are getting into some understanding what really happened there. And the world was quiet, and although women organizations in Israel approached women organizations globally, the UN Women, other women rights clinics and organizations in the US, there was silence. Only a week back, UN Women put a condemnation note, but it was too little and too late. They clubbed it along with other wrongs that are with women in Gaza. You cannot compare the two. What happened to women by Hamas in October 7 is uncomparable. And when terrorists that were held in Israel from this attack were investigated, it was premeditated. It wasn't just the decision of the terrorists that attacked in October 7 to rape. That was the plan of Hamas. And it's not just one that did it. You see many cases, tens and hundreds of cases that it happened, which makes us really think, who are those monsters? What is their sick mind that's the way they are fighting? I mean, we've seen terror attacks in the past, but this attack against women, and you rightly said that the women body was the battlefield. This is appalling. This is something that maybe the world will start to understand, and we are calling women organizations that usually say to women, we trust you, we believe you. No one believed until we had to go to the UN with those testimonials and really bring it. And it's very difficult information to watch and hear, but we need to do it because otherwise no one believes us. And it needs to be heard, and those people, women are no more with us. We need to be their mouth. We need to talk on their behalf. They cannot do it anymore.